What if the father you thought abandoned you forever was forced to face you again in the most unexpected place? Ryan gripped the wheel, his heart pounding. In the back seat, his twin boys slept peacefully. They had no idea this would be their last ride together. This is the only way, he told himself, a lie. Years later, he opened a door and froze. He never expected to see them again, not like this, not here. What really happened that night in the forest? Stay with me to find out, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Ryan's hands trembled on the steering wheel as he drove deeper into the forest. In the rearview mirror, he could see his 5-year-old twin sons asleep in the back seat, Louis with his dark skin glistening in the afternoon sun, and Jonathan with his fair complexion and light hair. The rare genetic phenomenon that had produced twins of different skin colors had once fascinated Ryan. Now it was just another reminder of the life he was abandoning. What kind of father does this? He whispered to himself, tears welling in his eyes. But the desperation had a way of making the unthinkable seem like the only option. 3 months without work, eviction notice on the door, empty cabinets, and now Rita was gone, having walked out after their last explosive fight, leaving behind only a note. They deserve better than either of us. Can you imagine the guilt of such a choice? Ryan parked the car near a campsite he remembered from happier times. It was off-season now, the area deserted but still furnished with basic facilities. He gently carried the sleeping boys, one at a time, to a picnic table, covering them with their jackets. From the trunk, he pulled out their small backpacks packed with snacks, water bottles, and a change of clothes. Just for a few hours, he lied to himself, just until I figure something out. He placed an envelope between the twins. Inside was a note explaining who they were, along with the phone number of their aunt in another state, the only relative who might help, though they hadn't spoken in years. I'm sorry, Ryan whispered, kissing each boy's forehead, someone better will find you soon. The drive back was torture, every mile felt like betrayal, but Ryan couldn't see another path. The social services worker had made it clear last week his housing situation made him unfit for custody. Foster care would separate the twins, different adoptive preferences, they had explained clinically. At least this way, they might stay together. The sun was setting when the first boy woke up. Louis rubbed his eyes, looking around in confusion at the unfamiliar surroundings. Daddy, he called out, his voice small in the vast forest. Jonathan stirred next, immediately clutching his brother's hand when he realized something was wrong. Together, they called for their father, their voices growing more panicked as only the birds answered. As darkness fell, the twins huddled together on the picnic table. Louis, always the protector despite being younger by 7 minutes, wrapped his arm around Jonathan. It's okay, he said, though his voice trembled. Remember what Daddy taught us about camping, we stay put if we get lost. But as the forest shadows deepened and strange sounds emerged from the trees, both boys knew this was different from their backyard camping adventures. This time, Daddy wasn't just hiding behind the tent to surprise them. The first howl in the distance made Jonathan whimper. I'm scared, Eli. Me too, Louis admitted, but we have each other, we always have each other. What secret will unravel next in this forest mystery? They didn't notice the headlights approaching through the trees, nor the expensive SUV that pulled into the campsite. They didn't see the elderly man step out, his posture straight despite his years, his clothes finer than any the boys had ever seen up close. All they knew was that suddenly a gentle voice was asking, "What are you two young men doing out here all alone?" Louis pulled Jonathan closer, remembering their father's warnings about strangers, but something in the old man's eyes, a kindness, a familiar sadness, made him pause. The man knelt, despite his fine clothes. My name is Simon, I have a cabin nearby, would you like to come somewhere warm while we figure out where you belong? Our daddy left us, Jonathan blurted out, tears streaming down his face, he's not coming back. Simon's expression changed, a complex emotion crossing his features that the boys couldn't interpret. He glanced at the envelope between them, now damp with evening dew. May I? He asked, gesturing to the letter. Louis nodded reluctantly, watching as Simon read the note, his eyebrows rising higher with each line. Louis and Jonathan Bernard, he read aloud, then looked up at the boys with an intensity that made both twins shift uncomfortably. What a remarkable coincidence that we should meet tonight. Why? Asked Louis, instinctively moving to shield his brother. Simon carefully folded the letter and placed it in his pocket before answering, because, young man, I've been searching for children exactly like you for a very long time. 3 months later, Ryan Bernard scrubbed the already gleaming marble floor of the executive bathroom at Russell Industries, his back aching from hours of cleaning, but he didn't dare slow down. After months of unemployment, this janitorial position was a lifeline he couldn't afford to lose, even if each day was a reminder of how far he had fallen. "Bernard, Mr. Russell's office needs attention before his afternoon meeting," his supervisor barked through the doorway, coffee spill on the carpet. Ryan nodded, gathering his supplies. Simon Russell, CEO and founder of the regional empire, demanded perfection in every corner of his headquarters. Employees spoke of the elderly businessman in hushed, reverent tones, a self-made millionaire known both for his ruthlessness in business and his generous philanthropy. Ryan had never encountered the man personally, which was a blessing. It was easier to clean the spaces of strangers than to look into their eyes. Since that night in the forest, Ryan had existed rather than lived. He had driven home in a daze, collapsing on his mattress still clothed, the expected relief never coming, only crushing regret that grew with each passing hour. By morning, he'd been frantic, racing back to the campsite only to find it empty, no sign of the twins, just the picnic table bare in the morning light. The police had been predictably suspicious, then dismissive. A father abandoning his children was a criminal, not a victim. The search was half-hearted at best, the social worker's expression of disgusted confirmation, "This is exactly what we feared would happen," haunted his dreams. Ryan pushed his cleaning cart down the executive hallway, his gaze fixed on the floor, until he reached the imposing double doors of Russell's office. He knocked softly. "Enter," came the commanding voice from within. Ryan stepped into the spacious corner office, keeping his head bowed as he'd been instructed during orientation. "Maintenance, sir, for the carpet." "Proceed," the elderly voice replied. "I'll continue my meeting." Only then did Ryan notice there were others in the room. He dared a glance upward and froze. Sitting on the luxurious leather sofa across from Russell's desk were two small figures with painfully familiar profiles, Louis and Jonathan. The carpet cleaner slipped from Ryan's numb fingers, clattering loudly on the hardwood floor bordering the carpet. The boys turned at the sound, their expressions transforming from polite interest to shock. "Daddy," Jonathan whispered, his voice small yet deafening in the sudden silence of the office. Louis said nothing, his dark eyes wide, his small body tensing as if preparing to either flee or fight. Simon Russell rose from behind his desk, his piercing gaze moving between Ryan and the twins with calculated deliberation. "You know this man, boys?" Ryan couldn't breathe. His sons, alive, well-dressed, seemingly unharmed, sat in his employer's office like they belonged there. Jonathan wore a small button-up shirt that probably cost more than Ryan made in a day. Louis' shoes were polished leather, not the worn sneakers he'd last seen him in. "Answer me, boys," Russell prompted when the twins remained silent, still staring at their father. "He's our biological father," Louis finally said, his young voice carrying a formality that had never been there before, "the one who left us in the forest." The words struck Ryan like physical blows. He reached for the wall to steady himself. "Louis," he managed, "Jonathan, I made a terrible mistake. I came back for you." "That's enough," Russell interrupted, his tone ice-cold. "Boys, please wait with Miss Jenkins in the outer office for a moment." A woman Ryan hadn't noticed stepped forward from the corner of the room, gently guiding the twins toward the door. Jonathan glanced back, his expression torn between confusion and longing. Louis kept his eyes straight ahead, his small shoulders rigid. When the door closed behind them, Russell turned to Ryan. "Explain yourself, quickly." Ryan's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before words tumbled out. "They're my sons. I was desperate, homeless, jobless, their mother left. I thought someone would find them quickly, someone who could give them what I couldn't." The justification sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Someone did find them," Russell said, circling his desk like a predator. "Me." "Are you fostering them?" Ryan asked, a flicker of hope kindling that perhaps he might somehow stay connected to his boys. Russell's laugh was short and without humor. "I've adopted them, Mr. Bernard, legally and permanently. The paperwork was finalized last week. The court was quite sympathetic to my petition, given the circumstances of their abandonment." The room seemed to tilt beneath Ryan's feet. "Please," he whispered, "they're all I have." "Had," Russell corrected sharply, "and you discarded them like trash." "I need to explain to them." "No," Russell interrupted, "you've lost that right. What you need to do is leave this office and submit your resignation immediately." "My job? Did you think you would continue working here, that you would have access to my sons?" Russell's emphasis on the possessive pronoun was unmistakable. I protect what's mine, Mr. Bernard, always. Please, Ryan begged, desperation rising, at least let me talk to them, just once. Russell considered him coldly. Perhaps, he said finally, under my supervision, but first I need to understand something. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. What kind of man abandons his children in the wilderness to die? I didn't want them to die, I thought. Actually, Russell interrupted again, I'm more interested in why you chose that particular campsite of all the places you could have left them. The question was so unexpected that Ryan could only stare in confusion. I'd been there before, it seemed safe enough, with the picnic tables and the emergency phone at the ranger station nearby. A strange expression crossed Russell's face, something almost like recognition, followed by calculation. Interesting, he murmured, very interesting. He straightened, adjusting his expensive suit jacket. One more question, Mr. Bernard, did you ever wonder why your twins have different skin colors? Did you ever have them tested? Ryan frowned. The doctor said it was rare, but not impossible. Fraternal twins can inherit different combinations of genes from mixed-race parents, and you and their mother are both mixed race. I am. Rita was mostly white with some Hispanic heritage. Russell nodded slowly, a smile spreading across his face that made Ryan's skin crawl. I think you should come to my home for dinner tonight, Mr. Bernard. There's something about your sons, my sons now, that you should know. Ryan stood before the wrought iron gates of the Russell estate, his heart hammering against his ribs. The security guard examined his ID with suspicious thoroughness before finally waving him through. As Ryan walked up the curved driveway, the mansion loomed ahead, a sprawling testament to wealth that made him acutely aware of his worn shoes and the second-hand suit he'd frantically purchased that afternoon. The front door opened before he could knock. A uniformed housekeeper greeted him with practiced politeness. Mr. Bernard, please follow me, Mr. Russell is expecting you in the study. Ryan followed her through the marble foyer, past rooms larger than his entire apartment, trying to absorb the reality that his sons now lived in such opulence. Framed photographs lined one hallway, recent pictures of Louis and Jonathan at a playground, on horseback, blowing out candles on what must have been their 6th birthday. Their smiles seemed genuine, which both relieved and devastated him. The housekeeper stopped at a heavy wooden door, knocked twice, then gestured for Ryan to enter. Simon Russell sat behind an antique desk, looking more relaxed than he had at the office, though no less imposing. He gestured to a leather chair. Sit down, Mr. Bernard. Ryan remained standing. Where are my sons? Having dinner in the kitchen, you'll see them shortly. Russell leaned back, but first we need to have a conversation. About what? About why I was at that particular campsite the night you abandoned your children. Ryan tensed. This wasn't what he'd expected. You said you had a cabin nearby. I do, one I've owned for 30 years. Russell opened a desk drawer and removed a framed photograph, sliding it across the desk. Take a look. Ryan cautiously picked up the frame. The photo showed a younger Simon Russell standing beside a woman on the porch of a rustic cabin. Between them stood a girl of about 12, her dark hair in braids, her smile revealing missing front teeth. My daughter Nadia, Russell said, his voice softening, and my late wife Olga. I don't understand what this has to do with. Nadia loved that forest, Russell continued as if Ryan hadn't spoken. When she was 18, she met a young man there, a park ranger's son named James Bernard. The name hit Ryan like a physical blow. James Bernard was my father. Yes, Russell nodded. Nadia and James had a brief relationship that summer before she left for college. Olga and I disapproved. We had different plans for our daughter's future, but young love is persistent. Ryan sank into the chair, a dizzying realization beginning to form. Are you saying? I'm saying that Nadia became pregnant that summer. Russell's eyes never left Ryan's face. She hid it from us until she couldn't anymore, then she dropped out of college and ran away with your father. We searched but they didn't want to be found. My mother died in childbirth, Ryan said numbly. I never knew her. My father raised me alone. Yes, Nadia died giving birth to you. Russell's voice had a controlled quality as if he'd practiced saying these words without emotion. James sent us one letter afterward, with a photo of you as an infant, then nothing. By the time we tracked him down years later, he'd remarried and told you his new wife was your mother. You're saying you're my grandfather. The words felt foreign on Ryan's tongue. Biologically, yes, Russell's tone hardened, but don't mistake that for sentimentality. James Bernard stole my daughter and her future. When we finally located him, he refused to let us be part of your life. Why would he do that? Because your father blamed us, blamed me specifically, for pressuring Nadia to give up the pregnancy. It wasn't true, but James believed it. He told me I'd killed her with my ambitions. Ryan tried to process this revelation. All those years growing up with a father who rarely spoke of his mother, who moved them frequently, who seemed always to be looking over his shoulder. Had he been running from the Russells? I never stopped looking for you, Russell continued, even after James died, but you changed your name from Ryan Bernard Jr. to just Ryan Bernard, you moved states, you were hard to track. So finding my sons at that campsite was not coincidence. Russell stood, walking to the window. I still visit that cabin regularly, it was the last place I saw Nadia happy. He turned back to Ryan. Imagine my shock when I found two boys abandoned at the very picnic table where Nadia used to eat her lunch, and then to discover they were my great-grandsons. You knew who they were before you read the note, Ryan realized. I suspected. The resemblance to Nadia in the dark-haired one, Louis, is remarkable, but yes, the note confirmed it. Why didn't you try to find me then? Why adopt them without telling me who you were? Russell's expression hardened. Because you abandoned them just as your father effectively abandoned my daughter. The Bernard men seem to have a talent for destroying my family. Why would I give you another chance? They're my sons, Ryan protested. And they my last connection to Nadia. Russell's voice was steel. I've spent the past 3 months observing you, Mr. Bernard. The job at my company wasn't coincidence either. I wanted to see what kind of man you were before deciding whether to reveal myself. And what have you decided? Russell didn't answer directly. Instead he pressed an intercom button. Send the boys in now, please. Ryan's heart leapt to his throat. The door opened and Louis and Jonathan entered, stopping just inside the threshold. They wore matching sweaters and khaki pants, their hair neatly combed. They looked like they belonged in this mansion, in this life of privilege. Jonathan spoke first, his voice small. Hello, Dad. Louis remained silent, his expression guarded. The weariness in his eyes cut deeper than any accusation could have. Boys, Ryan said, his voice breaking, I missed you so much. Mr. Russell says you're coming to dinner with us, Jonathan said cautiously, and that you have something important to tell us. Louis added, meeting Ryan's gaze directly. Ryan looked from his sons to Russell, confusion evident. Russell gave him a thin smile. Yes, Mr. Bernard, he said, why don't you explain to the boys exactly why you left them in the forest that night? I'm sure they'd like to hear it directly from you. The air seemed to leave the room. Ryan looked at his sons' expectant faces, realizing with sickening clarity that this was a test, perhaps the most important one of his life. Whatever he said next would determine whether he had any future with his children. And behind their matching expressions of cautious hope, he saw something else, a fragile trust in their new guardian that he could either validate or destroy with his next words. Ryan knelt down to meet his sons at eye level, ignoring Russell's imposing presence behind him. 1,000 rehearsed explanations evaporated as he faced the wounded innocence in their eyes. I made the worst mistake of my life that night, he began, his voice raw with emotion, and there's no excuse that can make it right. Were you tired of us? Jonathan asked, the simple question piercing Ryan's heart. No, never, Ryan insisted. I loved you boys every single day, every minute. Then why? Louis demanded, his small voice strengthened by 3 months of stored hurt. Ryan took a deep breath. Russell wanted him to fail this test, to lie or minimize or blame others, but only the complete truth would do. I was scared, he admitted. After your mom left, I lost our apartment, I couldn't find work. The social worker said they'd put you both in foster care, but probably in different homes. His voice broke. I thought someone would find you quickly at the campsite, someone who could give you everything I couldn't. But you just left us there, Louis said, his eyes glistening. You didn't even say goodbye. Because I was a coward, Ryan said, a tear tracking down his cheek. I told myself I was doing it for you, but I was wrong, so wrong. I came back the next morning, but you were already gone. I've been searching for you ever since. Jonathan shifted his weight from foot to foot. Mr. Russell says we live with him now, he's our great-grandpa. I know, Ryan swallowed hard, and he can give you things I never could, like ponies, Jonathan added seriously, and our own rooms in school with no bullies. Ryan nodded, the knife of inadequacy twisting deeper. That's right. Louis, always more perceptive, asked, are you going to try to take us away from here? From the corner of his eye, Ryan could see Russell tense. The question hung in the air, the real test beneath the surface. No, Ryan said finally, I won't take you away from safety and stability, not again. He looked up at Russell, but I'm asking for the chance to be part of your lives, to earn back your trust day by day. The twins looked to Russell, their new guardian, for guidance. The elderly man's expression was unreadable. Please, Ryan added, still on his knees, I know I don't deserve it, but they're my sons, and your great-grandsons, shouldn't we try to be a family despite everything? After what seemed like an eternity, Russell nodded once. Dinner is served in the main dining room. Boys, show your father the way. Jonathan immediately grabbed Ryan's hand, tugging him toward the door with the simple forgiveness of childhood. Louis hesitated, then offered his hand as well, his eyes still wary but willing. As they left the study, Ryan heard Russell murmur, "This isn't over, Mr. Bernard, not by a long shot." The grand dining room dazzled with crystal and silver, the table long enough to seat 20, though only 4 places were set. The boys chattered through dinner, recounting their adventures of the past months, horseback riding lessons, a trip to the seaside, their new school. Ryan listened, grateful for every word, yet aching at all he'd missed. Russell watched the exchange with calculating eyes, occasionally prompting the twins to share specific stories that highlighted the advantages of their new life. And tomorrow, Jonathan announced excitedly over dessert, we're going to meet our grandmother. Ryan looked up sharply, your grandmother? My Olga passed decades ago, Russell explained. Jonathan is referring to his maternal grandmother, Rita's mother, she's flying in tomorrow. Mrs. Harris is coming here. Ryan sat down his spoon, stunned. But Rita hasn't spoken to her parents in years, not since they disowned her for, he trailed off, suddenly aware of the twins' attentive expressions, for marrying you. Russell finished smoothly, yes, she mentioned that unfortunate estrangement when we spoke last week. The room seemed to tilt. You've spoken to Rita? Russell dabbed his lips with a napkin. Of course, when I found her sons abandoned, locating their mother was a priority. It took some doing, but eventually my investigators found her in Seattle. Seattle, Ryan repeated numbly. Is she coming too? Not yet, she's completing a rehabilitation program, 45 days clean so far. Ryan absorbed this information, relief and anger warring within him. Rita was alive, getting help, while he'd been breaking under the pressure. She disappeared into addiction. Boys, Russell addressed the twins, it's nearly bedtime. Why don't you say good night to your father while I have a word with Miss Jenkins about tomorrow's arrangements? Obediently, Louis and Jonathan slipped from their chairs. Jonathan hugged Ryan immediately, while Louis offered a more tentative embrace. Will you come back tomorrow? Jonathan asked hopefully. Ryan looked to Russell, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Yes, I'll be here. After the boys left with the housekeeper, silence fell heavily between the two men. Russell poured himself a small glass of amber liquid, not offering one to Ryan. Rita Harris was quite forthcoming once she understood the situation, he said. She confirmed what the DNA tests already told me. DNA tests, Ryan tensed. Standard procedure in adoptions these days, Russell replied smoothly, especially in unusual cases like this one. What did the tests show? Russell studied him over the rim of his glass. They confirmed that Jonathan is your biological son, but Louis is not. The statement hung in the air like a thunderclap. Ryan shook his head in denial. That's impossible, they're twins, born minutes apart, I was there. Superfetation, Russell said, the clinical term dispassionately, a rare phenomenon where a woman continues to ovulate after becoming pregnant, resulting in a second conception days or weeks later. The children develop simultaneously and are born together, but they have siblings, not twins, different fathers. Rita wouldn't, Ryan began, then stopped, memories flooding back, their brief separation 6 years ago during a rough patch early in their relationship, the reconciliation, the surprising pregnancy announcement just weeks later. She didn't tell you, Russell observed, but she told me during our conversation. She admitted that Louis's biological father is a man named Daniel Lanier. He sipped his drink, a man currently serving 10 years in state prison for armed robbery, incidentally. Ryan sat in stunned silence. All these years he'd raised Louis as his own, never questioning the rare genetic explanation for the twins' different appearances. The revelation should have changed how he felt, but it didn't. Louis was his son in every way that mattered. Does this change things for you, Mr. Bernard? Russell asked, watching him intently, now that you know one of your sons isn't yours biologically? The question carried the weight of yet another test. Ryan met the older man's gaze steadily. No, it changes nothing. I've been Louis's father since the day he was born. Biology doesn't make a family, love does. Something shifted in Russell's expression, a softening perhaps, or recognition. Then perhaps there's hope for you yet, he said quietly, because tomorrow, Mr. Bernard, we begin negotiations. Negotiations. Russell set down his glass with deliberate precision. For your role in the boys' lives moving forward. I've spent 30 years searching for my daughter's child, only to find the last piece of Nadia in those boys. I won't lose them. His voice hardened, but I'm old enough to know that children need their parents, even flawed ones, so we'll create an arrangement, one that gives the boys stability and advantages, while allowing you to remain in their lives on your terms. Ryan said, understanding dawning. My terms? Yes, which will include you moving into the guest house on this property, accepting the position I'll create for you at my company, and adhering to certain standards of behavior. Russell stood, signaling the end of the conversation, unless, of course, you'd prefer to walk away again. The implication was clear. This was Russell's world now, and Ryan would either adapt to it or lose his sons forever. As Ryan was escorted to the door, his mind reeled with the day's revelations: his grandfather, Rita's recovery, Louis's parentage, and now this devil's bargain from Russell, a chance to be with his children, but under the controlling thumb of a man with 3 decades of resentment. At the threshold, Russell placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong for his age. One more thing, he said, his voice low. Rita mentioned something curious during our conversation. She said that on the night she left, she called someone to pick her up. She claimed it was a rehabilitation center, but the number doesn't match any facility in the area. His eyes bored into Ryan. I wonder who might have helped her disappear so conveniently just before you made your fateful decision. The question hung between them, laden with suspicion and unspoken accusations. As the heavy door closed between them, Ryan spent a sleepless night in his sparse apartment, Russell's final insinuation echoing in his mind. Someone had helped Rita disappear just before he'd made his desperate choice, but who? And why would Russell care after all this time? By morning, he'd made his decision. He would accept Russell's terms, move into the guest house, take whatever position was offered, live under his grandfather's controlling influence, all to remain in his sons' lives. What choice did he have? As he prepared to return to the mansion, a knock at his door startled him. Few people knew where he lived. When he opened it, he found himself face to face with a woman he hadn't seen in over 6 years. Vivian, he said, shock rendering him momentarily speechless. Vivian Harris, Rita's younger sister, looked markedly different from his memories. Dawn was the rebellious college student with multiple piercings and vibrant hair. In her place stood a polished professional, her dark haircut in a sleek bob, her tailored suit suggesting success. Hello, Ryan, she said, her expression unreadable. May I come in? He stepped aside wordlessly, watching as she surveyed his modest apartment with barely concealed distaste. I saw the boys yesterday, she said without preamble, at Russell's mansion. You're in contact with your parents now? Ryan asked, confused. The Harris family had cut ties with both Vivian and Rita years ago. Vivian for her sexuality, Rita for her relationship with Ryan. Only recently, Mother called me after Russell contacted them about the boys. She turned to face him directly. I've been helping Rita. She's been staying with me in Seattle for the past 3 months. The revelation hit Ryan like a physical blow. He managed. You're the one who helped her leave that night? Vivian's gaze was steady. She called me desperate, said she couldn't handle it anymore, the poverty, the pressure, she was using again, pills mostly. I drove through the night to pick her up. Why didn't you take the boys too? The question burst from him, raw with accusation. She didn't want to, Vivian admitted, having the grace to look ashamed. She said you were the better parent, that they'd be safer with you. Ryan laughed bitterly, and look how that turned out. I know what you did, Vivian's voice hardened, and I'll never forgive you for it, but I'm not here to judge, I'm here to warn you. About what? About Simon Russell. She glanced toward the window as if checking for surveillance. There's more going on than you know. Ryan gestured for her to sit at his small kitchen table. What do you mean? Vivian perched on the edge of the chair. When Rita and I were growing up, our parents worked for Russell Industries. Dad was in accounting, Mom in legal. They were company people through and through, completely loyal to Simon Russell. I never knew that, because Rita didn't want you to know. When she started dating you, our parents recognized your last name immediately. Bernard. They knew about Nadia, about the scandal. They warned Rita to stay away from you because of who my father was, Ryan asked incredulously. Partly, but mostly because of what they believed your father had done. Vivian leaned forward. Ryan, our parents believed your father stole something valuable from Russell before he ran away with Nadia, something worth millions. That's why Russell hunted him so relentlessly all those years. Ryan shook his head in confusion. That's ridiculous. My father was many things, but not a thief. We lived modestly my entire childhood. Perhaps he didn't use whatever he took, Vivian suggested. or couldn't sell at all I know is that Russell's obsession with finding your father went beyond a family grudge. After your father died, Russell's investigators started watching you instead. The pieces began to click into place. You're saying I've been under surveillance for how long? Years, according to my mother. They lost track of you for a while after you changed your name, but they found you again when you applied for a marriage license with Rita. That's when our parents cut her off, not just because they disapproved of the relationship, but because they were afraid of Russell's retribution. Ryan's mind reeled with the implications. So when I left the boys at that campsite, it was no coincidence that Russell found them? Vivian finished. His people had been watching you for months, especially after Rita left. They probably followed you to the forest that night and let me abandon my children, Ryan asked, horror creeping through him. I don't know, maybe they weren't close enough to intervene, or maybe, she hesitated, maybe what? Maybe they wanted to see what you would do, to prove you were like your father, someone who abandons their family. Ryan felt sick. Why are you telling me this now? Vivian stood, straightening her suit. Because Rita is coming back, her rehab program ends next week, she's clean, she's determined to make amends, and she wants her sons back. Russell will never allow it. No, he won't, Vivian agreed, which is why I need to know where you stand. Are you with him now, or are you willing to help us? Help you do what? Get the boys away from him legally. Rita and I have been working with a lawyer. With both biological parents united and rehabilitated, we might have a case, especially if we can prove Russell has been manipulating events all along. Ryan stared at her, conflicted. He's offering me a chance to be in their lives, a job, a place to live near them. At what cost, Ryan? Your freedom, your dignity, and what happens when he decides you're no longer useful? Vivian reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. Think about it, I'm staying at this hotel until tomorrow. Rita will be here next week. She moved toward the door. One more thing, don't tell Russell you saw me. As far as he knows, I'm still estranged from my family and have no interest in the boys. After she left, Ryan sat motionless at his kitchen table, the business card lying before him like a lifeline or a trap. His phone buzzed with a text from Russell's assistant, instructing him to arrive at the mansion by noon to meet Mrs. Harris, Rita's mother. He had hours to decide where his loyalties lay, with the grandfather who had searched for him for decades but now sought to control him, or with the ex-partner who had abandoned their family but was now fighting to reclaim it. The atmosphere in Russell's sitting room was thick with tension. Evelyn Harris, a silver-haired woman with Rita's eyes and a rigid posture, sat perched on an antique settee, beside her husband James, a man whose once powerful frame had begun to stoop with age. The twins sat between them, Jonathan chattering happily, while Louis observed the adults with his usual careful scrutiny. Ryan stood awkwardly by the fireplace, hyper-aware of the difference between his department store suit and James Harris's bespoke attire. Russell presided over the gathering from his armchair, the picture of the benevolent patriarch. It's remarkable how much they've grown, Evelyn was saying, her manicured hand smoothing Jonathan's fair hair. Rita's baby pictures look just like this. They're exceptionally bright boys, Russell replied. Louis has a natural aptitude for mathematics, and Jonathan shows remarkable artistic talent. We should have been part of their lives from the beginning, James Harris said, regret evident in his voice. Family disagreements should never affect the children. Ryan bit back a retort about their willingness to disown their daughters. Instead he asked, have you spoken with Rita recently? The room fell silent. Evelyn and James exchanged glances before Evelyn answered carefully, we've been in contact since Mr. Russell informed us of the boy's situation. She's doing well in her recovery program. And Vivian, Ryan pressed, watching for reactions, have you reconnected with her too? Another loaded glance between the Harrises. Vivian's situation is different, James replied stiffly. Russell's keen gaze shifted between Ryan and the Harrises. I wasn't aware Vivian was still in the picture. Last I heard she'd moved abroad. Seattle isn't abroad, Ryan said, the words escaping before he could stop them. It's just a few hours' flight. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Russell's eyes narrowed. You've spoken with Vivian recently then? Before Ryan could respond, a housekeeper entered to announce lunch was served, temporarily diffusing the tension. As they all moved toward the dining room, Russell placed a firm hand on Ryan's shoulder, holding him back. We'll have a private conversation after our guests leave, he said, his voice low but hard as steel, about loyalty and what happens to those who lack it. Through the elaborate lunch, Ryan's mind raced Vivian's warnings about Russell Ward with his desire to secure a place in his sons' lives. Every time he looked at Louis and Jonathan laughing with their grandparents as if the past 3 months of trauma had never happened, he felt the weight of his responsibility to them. When the meal concluded, Russell invited the Harises to tour the gardens with the twins. As they left, he turned to Ryan. "Now," he said, all pretense of warmth gone, "tell me exactly what Vivian Harris said to you and when." "She came to my apartment this morning," Ryan admitted, seeing no point in lying. "She said she's been helping Rita recover in Seattle, and she suggested that you've had me under surveillance for years, that finding the boys at that campsite wasn't coincidence." Ryan met Russell's gaze directly. "Is it true?" Russell's expression remained impassive. "Does it matter? The outcome is the same. Your sons are safe, well cared for, and you have an opportunity to remain in their lives." "It matters to me. What matters," Russell countered, "is what Vivian is really after. Did she mention Rita wanting custody of the boys once she completes rehab?" "So he knew." "Yes," Ryan acknowledged. "And did she ask for your help in challenging my adoption?" "She wanted to know where I stand." "Where you stand," Russell repeated softly, dangerously, "an interesting choice of words considering your standing in my home, being offered my generosity after abandoning your children to the elements." He moved to a sideboard and poured himself a drink. "Let me be clear, Ryan, I can offer those boys everything: education, opportunity, connection, legacy. What can Rita offer, fresh out of rehab with a history of abandonment? What can you offer, living paycheck to paycheck when you can find work at all?" "Love," Ryan said simply, "their parents' love." "Love," Russell scoffed, "love doesn't pay for college or open doors or secure futures." "It did for my father," Ryan countered. "He chose love over wealth when he left with Nadia, and despite everything, I think he made the right choice." Something flashed in Russell's eyes, a genuine pain that momentarily cracked his composed facade. "Your father took more than my daughter when he left. He took something that belonged to me, something irreplaceable." "What?" Ryan asked, Vivian's words echoing in his mind. "What did he take?" Before Russell could answer, a commotion erupted from the garden. The French doors burst open and Louis ran in, his face streaked with tears. "Dad," he cried, making straight for Ryan rather than Russell, "Jonathan fell into the pond. Grandpa James jumped in after him, but he's not moving either." Ryan was already running toward the garden, Russell close behind. When Louis grabbed his hand, stopping him, "Dad," the boy said, his eyes wide with fear, "before Jonathan fell, I heard Grandma Evelyn talking on her phone. She said, 'It's time, the boys are by the water, no one will suspect.'" Ryan froze, Louis's words hitting him like a physical blow. "Stay here," he commanded, pushing the boy toward Russell, "don't leave his side." He sprinted through the French doors into the garden, heart hammering against his ribs. The ornamental pond lay at the bottom of a gentle slope, surrounded by weeping willows. As Ryan rounded the trees, he saw James Harris face down in the water near the edge, unmoving. Several yards away, Evelyn stood with her hands pressed to her mouth, seemingly in shock. And Jonathan, where was Jonathan? A splash from the center of the pond caught his attention. A small hand broke the surface before disappearing again. Without hesitation, Ryan dove into the cold water, powerful strokes carrying him to the spot where he'd seen his son. He took a deep breath and plunged beneath the murky surface, arms outstretched, searching desperately. His fingers brushed against fabric and he grabbed hold, pulling Jonathan toward him. The boy was limp, his eyes closed, lips tinged blue. Breaking the surface, Ryan gasped for air, cradling Jonathan's head above water as he swam one arm toward the shore. "Help," he shouted, though his voice sounded distant to his own ears, "someone help us." As he neared the edge, hands reached down. The gardener and one of Russell's security personnel who'd come running at the commotion, they pulled Jonathan from his arms, laying him gently on the grass. Ryan scrambled up beside them, dimly aware that others were pulling James Harris from the water nearby. "He's not breathing," the security guard said, his fingers at Jonathan's neck. "Move," Ryan commanded, years of mandatory CPR training at his various jobs taking over. He positioned Jonathan correctly, began chest compressions, counting under his breath, "Come on, buddy, come on." After 30 compressions, he tilted Jonathan's head back, pinched his nose, and gave 2 rescue breaths. Nothing. He resumed compressions, aware of sirens in the distance. "Please, Jonathan, please." On the 3rd cycle, Jonathan suddenly convulsed, water spewing from his mouth as he coughed violently. Ryan turned him onto his side, relief washing over him as his son took ragged breaths. Dad, Jonathan whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm here, Ryan said, gathering the boy carefully into his arms. I've got you. Only then did he look up, taking in the scene around him. Paramedics were working on James Harris a few yards away, their expressions grim. Russell stood at the top of the slope, one hand firmly on Louis's shoulder, the other holding a phone to his ear. And Evelyn Harris was being restrained by 2 security personnel, her composure shattered as she screamed incoherently. Hours later, Ryan sat in a hospital corridor, his clothes still damp, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. A police officer stood nearby, occasionally glancing his way. Down the hall, more officers were stationed outside 2 rooms, one where Jonathan was being treated for near drowning, the other where James Harris lay in critical condition after suffering a heart attack in the water. Footsteps approached, and Ryan looked up to see Russell walking toward him, his face lined with fatigue, but his posture still rigid with authority. Jonathan is asking for you, the elderly man said. The doctors say he'll make a full recovery. He was lucky. Ryan stood, relief washing through him. And Mr. Harris? Still unconscious. The next 24 hours will be critical. Russell's voice was flat. The police are questioning Evelyn now. She's not making much sense. Did you hear what Louis told me about what she said on the phone? Russell nodded grimly. The police found a prepaid cell phone in her purse. They're tracing the calls. Why would she want to hurt Jonathan, her own grandson? Not Jonathan, Russell corrected, both boys. According to what she told the officers initially, she believed it was the only way to break the curse. He spat the last words with disgust. What curse? Russell sank into the chair beside Ryan, suddenly looking every one of his 80 years. The Harris family has worked for me for 3 generations. James's father was my most trusted attorney during the early days of Russell Industries. Vivian mentioned they were company people. More than that, they were among the select few who knew certain family secrets. Russell's gaze grew distant, including what really happened with Nadia and your father. Ryan tensed. What do you mean, what really happened? When Nadia became pregnant, the Harrises advised me to handle it quietly, arrange an abortion, send her to Europe afterward, clean and simple. His voice hardened. I refused. She was my only child, my wife, and I wanted her to have the baby, to remain in college while we helped raise our grandchild, but my father took her away. Yes, and no. Russell met his eyes directly. James Harris Sr., Evelyn's father-in-law, told Nadia that I was planning to force her to terminate the pregnancy. He arranged for James Bernard to rescue her, provided them with false identification, money to start over. Why would he do that? Because 40 years ago, I discovered he had been embezzling from my company, millions over decades. I had evidence to send him to prison, ruin the family name. Instead, I forced him to work the rest of his life paying it back, knowing I could destroy him at any moment. Russell's hands clenched into fists. Taking Nadia was his revenge. He knew losing her would destroy me far more effectively than any financial blow. The pieces fell into place in Ryan's mind. So when my father sent that one letter after she died, it went to the Harrises first? They forwarded it to me, but not before adding their own note that if I tried to find you, they would make sure James Bernard told you horrible things about me, that you would grow up hating me. Russell's voice broke slightly. I was given photos of you over the years through their connections, but never allowed to make contact until my father died. Yes, but by then you changed your name, moved away. The Harrises claimed to have lost track of you, but they hadn't. Ryan realized, they knew exactly where I was through Rita. Precisely, when Rita began dating you, they recognized the name immediately. They kept it from me until after you were married, then used it to manipulate me further, suggesting that you might be a danger